Hi friends! Today's healthy foods may turn out to be tomorrow's poisons. Food fads are like the history of smoking. At one time, everyone did it, and now we know smoking is bad. Here are foods we once believed was the greatest invention until they weren't. Number one is popcorn, specifically microwave popcorn. I remember the first time I unfolded a bag and popped it in the microwave. Convenient, hot, fresh, tasty, just like the theaters, except now we know that that wasn't such a good idea. Now I know my mom, she blindly trusted stores and the food sold in those stores. She would never buy from a street vendor, but stores that couldn't possibly sell you something that was bad for you. But now we know those ingredients in microwave popcorn are slow poisons. And it's for several reasons. For starters, the bag is coated with chemicals called PFAS, so that your popcorn can just slide right out. Unfortunately, PFAS leaches to that popcorn, and what you're eating is a forever chemical that never breaks down in your body or outside of your body. And since then, it's been linked to cancers, thyroid disease, infertility, and developmental issues. And then you're gonna throw that bag away, right? So it stays in the environment because nothing can break it down. So it's a forever chemical that becomes forever trash that then contaminates and leaches in the soil and water for you to then get it again a second time. The first commercial microwave popcorn bag was introduced by a company called Golden Valley Microwave Foods. It was founded specifically to develop microwave popcorn, and they released the brand acute. Remember that? That became a household name. And in my household, we wouldn't just buy a single serving, we would buy boxes of them. So in the beginning, they actually put real butter in the popcorn bags, so it needed refrigeration. And then one day I realized that, no longer needs to be refrigerated. That's super interesting. So companies, they started inventing shelf-stable food. And so that your microwave popcorn was now full of hydrogenated oils when it didn't need refrigeration. Now, these oils are known as trans fats, and that's the second problem with microwave popcorn, as well as many other junky, convenient, shelf-stable foods. Trans fats are so stable that your own body can't break it down, which is not a good thing when it comes to eating food. You're supposed to be able to break it down to convert it to nutrients that you need, but you don't need any trans fats because you can't use it. Now, I bet you'd be surprised who invented the second problem, trans fats. It was actually a German. He was trying to turn something healthier, liquid vegetable oil, and he ended up making trans fat a slow poison. And at the time, they didn't know it was poison, right? But leave it up to Americans making tubs and tubs of it and selling it to us as shortening and margin. And then marketing it as a healthier alternative to butter. Remember those commercials?
Anyway, he tastes light, creamy, butter, like you.
Okay.
It's supposed to have tasted just like butter, but there was never any proof that it was healthier. And now we know that it wasn't. Now today, I don't think any dieting camp disagrees that trans fats are unhealthy and will increase your rate of heart disease and inflammation. Now the good news is trans fats sold in those tubs, they've been banned in the US since 2018. The bad news is trans fats are still in your food, like spreads with margarine and even sometimes peanut butter, your snacks, your chips and cookies, your non-dairy creamers, your convenient pre-packaged cake frostings, or pre-made vegetable shortenings, your pie crust, your cookies, your doughs, your pastries, your donuts, and pies. I'm sure I've left a lot of processed foods out. Now notice I just rattled off a whole bunch of addictive foods. And I used to eat those shelf-stable apple pies. My mom would buy me that for lunch because she thought it wasn't bad because it had some apples. So I ate a ton of trans fats too as a kid and became super fat myself. And I remember my mom just kept saying, just don't eat as much. But that's nearly impossible to do when you're eating highly processed foods. They're addictive, hyper palatable, and all you want to do is eat them. And I have to say, I honestly never really even liked those apple pies, but I ate them because they were sweet. Now, America is now the poster country of crappy food. But you know who actually invented margarine? The French. And to be exact, it was Napoleon's idea. He wanted to find an alternative to butter for his soldiers. But he didn't use trans fats. That wasn't invented until later on. Instead, he diluted beef tallow and pretended that it was butter. Now, I know a lot of you think that because it's all natural, it's good, right? It's better for you. Well, do you know what? Trans fats are also natural. They're naturally found in beef tallow. And in fact, there are natural trans fats in all kinds of dairy, including butter, milk, yogurt, and it's also in lamb. But to be fair, scientists aren't quite sure that the natural trans fats have as big of an impact as the synthetic trans fats created by hydrogenating vegetable oils. But it's really not a fair comparison because people ate tubs of trans fats from tubs of Crisco shortening. So when you cook with those, you're adding concentrated trans fats. But when you eat real food, you are not just eating trans fats, it's diluted amongst other ingredients. Isn't it quite telling that people are still seeking alternatives to that creamy texture? It speaks volumes on the power of food addiction. When you call it a food addiction, if you're willing to eat solid vegetable oil and pretend that it's butter. At the time, it was touted as a miraculous scientific breakthrough to help companies save a ton of money and make the public healthier, because that would be avoiding saturated fat. In the 1950s, scientists began to link saturated fat to heart disease. But what scientists failed to recognize was how food addiction would drive the public to seek alternatives to butter, be even worse for our nation's health. Fat-free snack meals and margarine were all invented as a healthier alternative to butter. And the question to seek for healthier alternatives never gets us any healthier. Once food companies realize that as long as they produce something that look good and have the right taste and texture, they could really sell us anything. And in fact, that's what they're doing. I posted some spring rolls that I made for dinner one day on my community post. And somebody said that it didn't look tasty to them because people eat with their eyes. And that is the big problem. Our eyes deceive us all the time. How many times have you been told, don't judge a book by its cover? And yet, that's how you pick your books. Or that things aren't always what they seem. Or that beauty is only skin deep. Appearances deceive us all the time. My spring roll was very simple. I had 3 mints, some cucumber, avocado, ground up some nuts and seeds, and literally wrapped that up in rice paper with some seaweed and rolled it up to feed my family. It's hard to serve my family a whole plate of vegetables because they won't eat it because it doesn't look appealing. And they always tell me that it's just too much vegetables. But when I roll it all up, fat volume disappears and then they don't complain. And the food industry, that's what it takes advantage of. Our desire to have food look good, to taste good. In my home, I discourage eating unhealthy items, and I'm always trying to sneak in healthy foods. And that's why I avoid processed foods, because usually there's some trans fats in it. Now, the reason why trans fats are very different from saturated fats is because it has a double bond, and that causes a kink in the molecule. Saturated fats, they don't have double bonds, which allow the molecules to stack neatly on top of each other. They become solid at room temperature, like butter and tallow and coconut oil. Those are all saturated fats. But just that little kink makes it so that our metabolism cannot handle trans fat. Trans fats elevates your body's low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, which is a bad type of cholesterol associated with arterial inflammation. It also lowers your good cholesterol, your high-density lipoprotein cholesterol. And, I understand people don't like the good and bad names for these cholesterol molecules. They're actually proteins that carry cholesterol, but that's the easiest way to explain it right now. On top of that, trans fat, it messes with your glucose metabolism. It increases insulin resistance, inflammation, promotes your risk to getting diabetes, as well as uncontrolled blood sugars. And this all of it increases your risk of heart attacks, strokes, infertility, and memory loss. And your low-density lipoproteins, they stay high after you eat trans fats because these fats actually stay in your body for a long time. And low-density lipoproteins already stays in your body for 3 to 5 days. So how did this Frankenstein molecule get introduced in our food supply? Remember, trans fats already exist in animal products, but they're at very low levels. But due to geopolitical events with the Great Depression, the World War, countries around the world, they ran out of beef. So there was a supply shortage. And to meet the addiction of the public for butter, the food industry began producing hydrogenated vegetable oils like margarines and shortenings as a substitute. And of course, companies took advantage of poor regulation of the American food system. The rule is, let's try it out first, see what happens, right? The FDA does not require companies to prove that a chemical in your food has long-term safety data before an ingredient is allowed to be introduced into our food supply. And that's why a lab invention like trans fats stayed in our food supply for almost 80 years. Remember how I told you that the initial microwave popcorn had to be refrigerated and subsequent versions were shelf stable? Well, when they took out the butter and put in the trans fats, They put in place of the butter an artificial butter flavor called diacetyl, a chemical that when inhaled causes a condition called popcorn lungs, or what we call in the medical field bronchiolitis obliterans, which means it literally obliterates your lung tissue, causes holes in your bronchus. So if you have the diagnosis of popcorn lung, then you're missing lung tissue and it never will come back. Now, you're either a really big fan of microwave popcorn and you're inhaling all that steam that comes out, or you're a factory worker. And believe it or not, diacetyl actually falls under the word natural flavorings. It's a natural compound found in fermented food like beer and yogurt, some fruits and coffee. And when it's purified, it's an artificial flavor, butter flavored. And I wouldn't be surprised if your jelly bean popcorn flavor or butter flavor was made out of artificial butter flavor called diacetyl. Guess who discovered diacetyl? Europeans, either in France or Germany. Some chemists fermented wine or beer and noticed a strong buttery aroma. And leave it up to the United States to take a chemical concoction and turn it into $1 billion food industry. So in the 20th century, the US added it to microwave popcorn, margarine, and baked goods. And apparently, it's safe to eat, but dangerous to inhale. The vapors, they cause intense inflammation, scarring small airways in the lungs. How much of this is causing lung cancer in Asians? And we would have never discovered this problem except that workers in Missouri in a microwave popcorn plant began suffering from severe unexplained lung disease. They all had shortness of breath that persisted with cough and fever. And those are classic symptoms to a tuberculosis outbreak. But it turns out to be diacetyl vapor causing a rare and irreversible lung disease. Now, usually trying to find a replacement for anything addictive just gets us in more trouble, but we still don't stop trying to find it. And that was true with saturated fat and butter, and is also true with sugar. And you know it's an addiction when companies are spending money to find cheaper ways to satisfy your addiction. And that's the story of high fructose corn syrup in your favorite candy and soda. We eat more high fructose corn syrup than any other nation in the world. Each person in the US consumes 60 pounds of high fructose corn syrup in a year. And of course, if you're consuming that much, you're probably eating packaged bakery items, condiments like ketchup or barbecue sauce, soft drinks, candies, snacks, frozen meals. You really can't get away from this stuff. So how did it happen? It's a cheaper, sweeter alternative than cane sugar. And why is it bad? Fructose. It's a toxin to your liver. And your liver is the king of your metabolism. You mess up your liver, you get diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome, fatty liver, cirrhosis, liver cancer, not compatible with healthy living. And all this ultimately leads to cardiovascular disease and other cancers. But we honestly would have never gotten here without the US government subsidizing big corn and taxing sugar. And again, high fructose corn syrup is a scientific creation. Initially, the cornstarch was broken up into glucose syrup, but then they discovered an enzyme that can actually convert that glucose into fructose, a much sweeter sugar. So can you believe that they manipulated the natural glucose into a sweeter substance so that they can put less of it in your food? But of course, they had to match the taste of sugar cane, which is a combination of glucose and fructose. And that didn't happen until the 1970s. And this became a gold mine, ideal for processed foods, condiment, perfect for sodas, juices, sauces, baked goods, cereals. But like all these Frankenstein creations, the public finally turned on high fructose corn syrup. That took about 30 years. So now many brands are trying to make quote unquote healthier alternatives. But when it comes to food addiction, you're not going to make a healthier substitute. You're going to just get alternative health problems. Number 4 is aspartame, an artificial sweetener used in diet soda. Aspartame was accidentally discovered by a chemist working for a US pharmaceutical company, and he was trying to invent a treatment for ulcers. He was apparently quite clumsy and accidentally got some of the chemical on his hand. And then he licked it, and it tasted sweet. In fact, aspartame is 200 times sweeter than real sugar. I don't think you're supposed to lick lab experiments, but it's actually not even a carbohydrate, even though it tastes sweet. It's not a sugar at all, and it's made from 2 amino acids, aspartic acid and phenylalanine. Amino acids are the same molecules that make muscles. Your body, it needs amino acids, but for certain people, if they get excess amino acids, even if it's required, they may not be able to metabolize that amino acid. And that's true for people with PKU, which is a condition that prevents them from from metabolizing phenylalanine, and they can get really sick if they eat anything with phenylalanine. PKU stands for phenylketonuria, which is a rare genetic disorder in which they get a buildup of phenylalanine when they eat an excess in their food. It could be toxic to the brain and even cause seizures. So they have to strictly avoid aspartame. For the rest of us, the problem with aspartame is actually because it's broken down. And when you break down aspartame, you make methanol. It's the same stuff in antifreeze. Then that methanol is broken down into formaldehyde, which is the same stuff that they use to embalm people. And then that formaldehyde becomes formic acid, and that is what your body pees out. So your body actually naturally makes some formaldehyde under normal metabolism, but taking it in excess overwhelms your body. And so some people are drinking tubs and tubs of diet soda, tubs and tubs of aspartame, and then they eat chewing gum. Basically, it's in sugar-free gum. And then they eat low-calorie yogurt. I was recommended to eat that when I was pregnant with gestational diabetes. Desserts, candy, gelatin, all these things with aspartame. They're supposed to be diabetic-friendly products, but are they? I myself was eating them throughout the day. And the more I ate, the more I wanted to eat because I was seeking junk food. So I ate a ton of artificial sweeteners as a young adult. And I didn't really realize the significance of formaldehyde until I walked into day one of my gross anatomy lab in medical school. It smelled so badly that it was burning my eyes. Formaldehyde is a colorless gas, but it smells really strong. And like I said, it's an embalming agent for people who don't survive, building materials. It's used as a disinfectant, industrial resin. It's not healthy. And every time you eat aspartame, you build up more formaldehyde than your body actually should be handling. And finally, in 2023, the World Health Organization and the International Agency for Research on Cancer declared aspartame to be possibly carcinogenic to humans. Hey, you know what? I drank a ton of diet soda too in my young adulthood. My friend also drank a ton of diet soda every day until he got colon cancer. And thank God I didn't get cancer, but I at one time had a horrible generalized body rash called urticaria vasculitis. And it didn't go away until I stopped my diet soda. But now they have data to show that artificial sweeteners, they actually alter your gut microbiome. And the wrong gut microbiome can cause autoimmune conditions as well as cancers. Now, I recently released a video on milk and how milk is associated with an elevated risk of prostate cancer. Are you drinking milk with added hormones called RBGH or recombinant bovine growth hormone, which is not a natural process? It was invented to mimic a natural growth hormone found in cows. So it's genetic manipulation, a form of genetic engineering to boost milk production in dairy cows. And its use was started in the 1990s. Cows receiving growth hormone could produce 10 to 15% more milk than cows who didn't. But people would still drink it because it didn't change how the milk tastes. But it did raise insulin-like growth hormone in that milk. And that hormone, IGF-1, stimulates breast, prostate, and colon cancer to grow. And this is another reason why to avoid dairy if you don't want to have extra hormones. Frankly, it already has plenty of its own.
Hi, friends. I am so thrilled that you want to take charge of your health and take charge of your food. Now, I know nutrition can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm here to support you in this lifelong journey. So if you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now.
And unfortunately for the animal, they don't just produce more milk, they also get more reproductive issues, more infections. Have you ever breastfed and got infected? That's mastitis. It's not pleasant, is it? And I can't imagine that the cow would enjoy that at all. So as a consequence, farmers began pre-treating cows with antibiotics to avoid mastitis. So now we have a massive amount of multi-drug resistant bacteria because we're using it in our farm animals. And on our quest to mass produce food to feed the world, we are breeding superbugs and we are increasing our risk for cancer, decreasing our ability to actually fight infections because we're losing our antibiotics. That to me is not a good trade-off. Remember, folks, that is why people didn't make it before. Infectious diseases. And if they treat your milk with hormones, they're actually not required to have it on the label. But many brands will write RBGH free or no artificial growth hormones on their labels. Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Canada, and even the European Union have banned the use of artificial growth hormone, but not the United States. And despite the US government not willing to protect us from synthetic hormones, many companies have voluntarily stopped using it because the public demands that. So there's a lot to be said about grassroots efforts. And hence, that's why I make my YouTube videos. How many of you enjoy a good glass of milk with some cookies or cakes? I know I used to do that. You know, my kids left cookies and a glass of milk for Santa Claus for several years. And they love the rainbow cookies, you know, with those M&Ms. Do you know how they made those colorful M&Ms? Food dyes, right? Artificial food dyes. Like red 40, yellow 5. Americans, we eat with our eyes. So food dyes make just visually more appealing and marketable food. I have a friend whose husband always feels sorry for their kids. So he takes them out to Taekwondo practice, and then he would stop by the store or the gas station and he would buy them candy like M&Ms. And her kids would come home super hyper. She always just assumed it was the sugar. But actually, the artificial food dyes can do that too. One of her sons struggled with asthma attacks, while artificial food dyes have been linked to allergic reactions. And guess what? Some of them are potentially carcinogenic. Many of these food dyes are banned in Europe. And I was watching some PhD food scientist Instagrammer who believes that people are eating such little amounts in the food that it really doesn't make a difference. Well, I respectfully disagree, because maybe you can control yourself and just eat one cookie, ma'am. But people don't eat like that. People who like artificial food dyes and artificial cookies, they're eating artificial stuff throughout the day, from their breakfast to their snacks to their lunches, their dinners, their desserts. And I think somebody in the current administration said that if it's banned in Europe, it shouldn't be allowed here. What's wrong with that? I think we think of food as a bunch of chemicals stuck together, while the Europeans think of food as something that's grown with their bare hands and passed along from generation to generation. Just because you combine something that's safe in the short run doesn't mean that these chemicals are safe in the long term. And by the way, I don't think that inhaling paint fumes is healthy, right? So why do we want to put chemicals like artificial food dyes in our body? We look at these chemicals as if they are in isolation, but we are surrounded by chemicals, and it causes our body stress. Each of us has a different threshold of stress. We can go outside. We can't control the air we breathe in outside, but we can control our food supply. And there's nothing wrong with upgrading our food supply so that we don't have these artificial chemicals that serve no biological purpose and feeding it to our children. So that brings us to number 6, bread. Specifically, American-made bread. If you think about it, our baking flours, they're kind of messed up. Bread these days is as soft as butter. They may taste and feel good, but they're not healthy for you, nor is the texture a normal texture. And that's a result of chemically treated flour with potassium bromate. And when you chemically treat that flour, that dough is stronger so that you can actually make it rise higher, make it fluffier and softer. Potassium bromate is also considered to be a probable human carcinogen and has been associated with kidney and thyroid tumors in animals. This is also banned in Europe and in China and in Brazil. But the US still allows this stuff. So if you're going to eat the common bread, there's probably some potassium bromate in it. And if you frequently bake your own, you're inhaling some of that stuff. It's actually known to be a lung irritant. It can cause headaches and nosebleeds. And of course, this is a problem with the raw dough. Apparently, if you bake it thoroughly, it should break down into potassium bromide, which is non-toxic. So if you're not baking it thoroughly, or if your temperature is too low, then that bromate will remain in your bread. Really, if you want to bake bread, use a whole grain flour. They don't add potassium bromate to whole grain flours, nor do they fortify it with synthetic vitamins. They don't need to, because whole grains have vitamins, unlike white flour. And if you want it pesticide and herbicide free, then buy it organic. Now, number 7 are breakfast cereals, invented in the late 1800s as a health food to supplement the vegetarian diet. Now, when I think of breakfast cereals, I think a lot about added sugar. But the original breakfast cereal had no added sugar and only had whole grains. We've come so far from that. It didn't even have preservatives like BHA and BHT. Sadly, today's cereals are highly refined and processed starch that are unnaturally shaped into textures by high heat and pressure that destroy nutrients. Kids' breakfast cereals have more refined sugar, than cookies. And to prevent all of it from rotting, they add synthetic antioxidants like BHA, butylated hydroxyl anisole, and BHT, butylated hydroxyl toluene. Here's a list of shelf-stable packaged foods that have these antioxidants that are classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as a possible carcinogen to humans. In animal studies, it's been shown to promote tumor growth, disrupt the endocrine system, and negatively affect their liver and kidney function. The European Union and Japan have banned the use of these chemicals in their food. And of course, the dose makes a poison. So a bowl of breakfast cereal once in a while with BHA and BHT is probably not going to do a whole lot. But seriously, who just eats a serving of breakfast cereal? Most people who have that breakfast cereal will want to finish that whole box and probably have a collection of other boxes too. And when you eat breakfast cereal, nobody eats one serving. They probably at least eat 2 to 3. And on top of that, for lunch, they're probably eating some kind of instant noodle, prepackaged rice, or some pasta mix, some kind of snack food like potato chips, tortilla chips, chewing gum, probably have some candy, and of course, nobody eats noodles by themselves, so they always eat it with some kind of beef jerky or sausage, hot dogs, or lunch meat. And when you eat a little bit of all these things, they all add up. 70% of what is sold to us in the supermarket, they're ultra processed, even if you don't live in a food desert. And you can bet that there's some kind of preservative in that ultra processed food. And studies have shown that even people who cook on their own, 50% of what they make is from ultra-processed food. We have an addiction to ultra-processed foods, and these chemicals allow us to eat them and get them conveniently. And like any addict, you have to first recognize that you have an addiction in order to do something about it. But it's hard to recognize that because we eat things that we think are healthy. Like number 8, pretzels. Have you had a pretzel chip? Have you seen how much MSG is added to pretzel? Things that don't require refrigeration, they're usually also salty. And pretzels at one point were considered to be healthier, but not by much because it's still made from refined processed flour. But it was an alternative to potato chips. Now, many of these seasoned pretzels, they have a special salt called monosodium glutamate, MSG, which is actually a flavor enhancer invented by the Japanese in the early 1900s. It's a natural substance. It's found in seaweed, tomatoes, mushrooms, and cheese. But when you add MSG, you actually increase the intensity of the flavors of your soups, your snacks, your fast food, your frozen meals, your noodles, and so many other products. So it basically makes cardboard taste good. It's a cheap, effective marketing tool to make more food addicts. Now, I'm Chinese, but I don't like buying Chinese snacks because they put so many of these addictive chemicals that they're really not selling you food. They're selling you very tasty, pleasing, appetizing chemicals. Now, each of these chemicals by itself, they're not going to be addictive. But when you combine them together with some real food, it's a highly addictive substance. And it's hard for us, for anybody, to find fast food or savory snack foods without these ingredients because we're looking in the wrong place. The invention of MSG taught millions of Asians to add this in their kitchen just to make their food taste better. And unfortunately, in the 1960s, it was discovered that MSG causes health symptoms. It's formerly known as the Chinese restaurant syndrome. So after you eat MSG-laced foods, you can get headaches, flushing, numbness, and potentially chest tightness. All not pleasant. The G stands for glutamine. Glutamine is a neurotransmitter that everybody has in their brain. And when you're getting abnormally high amounts of it, like adding it as a seasoning, it causes neural excitation, excites your brain. That's what gives you these symptoms. In animal studies, it's been linked to lesions, hormonal imbalances, obesity, and metabolic changes. In people, MSG can cause dizziness, fatigue, nausea, asthma-like symptoms. But MSG is now a boogie word. So the food industry, they know you're looking for that word. So now instead of MSG, they're using a bunch of other chemical names that do the same job. Or they just put natural flavor, autolyzed yeast extract, or hydrolyzed vegetable protein. All sounds healthier, right? So I have a family member who can't tolerate MSG. He is a canary in the coal mine because he tastes the food and he will pretty much immediately have these symptoms. And MSG, what it's done is it turned junk food into American staples and trained our palate to go look for that flavor. Number 9 will surprise many of you. It's chicken. Your chicken today is not your grandmother's chicken. The chicks hatch at industrial hatcheries without their mothers, and the eggs are all incubated artificially. Chicken takes roughly 27 to 42 days to grow into 5 to 6 pounds, which is the right amount for market. Due to genetic breeding, feeding, and lighting, we have made this an industrial industrial process, raising chickens. I have a friend who raises chickens, and she feeds her chickens really good food, including antioxidant-rich whole plants, unlike industrially raised chickens that are fed corn and soy-based diets. And on top of that, she keeps her chickens free roaming. They have this built-in house that moves across her fields, and she never gives them any antibiotics, unlike industrial raised chickens, in the pretense that they're preventing disease. But in reality, they're used as a growth promoter, and they're causing our loss of antibiotics by making superbugs resistant to antibiotics. In the end, it doesn't really even matter that you expose yourself to antibiotic-raised animals, because there's just no way to sterilize chickens so that the natural germs that they have, like salmonella, they all become drug resistant. And when you bring chicken home, you easily spread it from surface to surface, doorknob to doorknob, and then it'll get into your gut microbiome and colonize you. And don't be surprised that all of a sudden you get your first urinary tract infection with a drug-resistant bacteria. A big problem is that many moms or cooks, they rinse their meat in the kitchen sink. Do not ever rinse your meat in the kitchen sink. If you have to rinse your meat, take it outside. Your sink becomes filthier than your toilet, because most people will clean their toilet, but they never clean their kitchen sink. And on top of that, it splatters everywhere, all over your counter, on their knobs. And of course, this can lead to food poisoning, which affects 500,000 Americans, and it may get worse this year. But you also cross-contaminate your home. It's easy to splatter chicken stuff all over your house and not realize that you splattered it, or not wash your hands well or a plate well. Now, if you have immediate symptoms, you'll have diarrhea, you may throw up, but some people have long-term symptoms, like heart valve infections or chronic irritable bowel syndrome. And it doesn't really matter what kind of chicken you buy, organic, free range, to kosher, to conventional. They all are super contaminated with bacteria, and many of them are superbugs now. They all get contaminated during the processing after slaughter. Over 1 million cases of illness are linked to poultry alone, and 1/4 of the chicken parts are contaminated with salmonella. It's not unexpected that you're going to get some of these into human disease unless you already eat the food, because salmonella is a natural bacteria found in animals, especially chickens. And each person in America is estimated to eat 150 pounds of chicken in a year, which is more than beef or pork. And to keep up with that kind of chicken demand, 9 billion chickens are slaughtered every year in the United States alone. How do you raise animals humanely like that and keep people safe? It's very hard. And that's why we're having issues with the flu and food poisoning. Now, have you noticed that chickens have gotten larger and larger over the years? These are not normal chicken folks. The leanest chicken part is still 20% fat. And recently, the US government culled a bunch of chickens because they caught the flu. So the whole lot has to go. Because when one catches a flu, they can't turn around and be by themselves. They're so crowded. Each chicken is in a 1 square foot per bird room. And then their litter is made out of dust or wood shavings that are probably reused between flocks. And on top of that, did you know that arsenic was fed to chickens since 1944? I believe arsenic is a group 1 carcinogen that causes bladder, lung, skin cancers, and it's linked to neurological, cardiovascular, and developmental issues. And why did they use it? Because arsenic helped the chicken look pinker. We eat with our eyes. And it also controlled intestinal parasites from growing. And it also improved their feed efficacy. In fact, 70% of US broiler chickens had arsenic even up to 2011. The FDA finally banned arsenic in 2015. So for those of you who believe that the FDA was doing a good job when they were in full service protecting the public, I really think it depends what part of history you're looking at, what chemical you're looking at. And of course now, things have changed quite a bit. But even before all these changes this year, when 1 million people get infectious diseases from a single ingredient, a bird, I think that regulatory agency is not really doing a good job. However, the public just kind of accepts it. I don't think we would accept that many cases of salmonella from spinach, would we? Or from a supplement or from a child's toy. But chicken's okay. I believe we have a double standard here. And the reality is that we live in a world of abundance. We choose to, focus our efforts on what we want to do. And right now, the good news is there's so many healthier foods to choose from. And if you want to learn more about that, watch the next video.